afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm Andrea Kaminsky, Club President. Thanks for joining us today. We'll start our meeting by reciting the Rotary four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Number one, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you. And now, past President Jason Barron, who is a member of our Members Recognition Committee, will come up and introduce a club member who will be receiving a Club Service Award today. Jason?
Thank you, President Andrea. Karen Kendrick-Hans joined our Rotary Club in 2012, and she holds the classification of consulting and is the co-founder of the Environmental Sustainability Rotarian Action Group, ESREG. Karen is married to fellow Rotarian Larry Hans. She was also a Rotary Youth Exchange student to Australia when she was in high school, which may explain her strong interest in the international focus of Rotary. Since joining our club, Karen has been very active in our club activities. She has served on our international projects and programs, Rotary Youth Exchange, Scholar Mentoring, and Rotaract Advisory Committees, along with being active in the Going Green Fellowship Group. Beyond Rotary, Karen is currently the Director of Communications for the Rotarian Sustainability Action Group, ESREG. Most recently, Karen had the honor of being Rotary International's first observer delegate to the UN FCCC climate talks in Poland in 2018. For her dedicated service to the Rotary Club of Madison, the club board of directors has named Karen Kendrick-Hans as the 2020 Rotary Club of Madison International Service Award recipient. Since we are not able to meet in person, we have a certificate and pin that will be mailed Karen in recognition of this award. Thank you, Karen, for your continued service above self efforts, and congratulations on this well-deserved recognition.
Thank you, Jason, and congratulations to Karen on this well-deserved honor. And now, Mark Moody, who's our incoming club president-elect, is going to tell us more about a new special ad hoc committee related to membership. Mark?
Thank you, President Andrea. Welcome, fellow Rotarians. As you know, in mid-March, when COVID-19 struck our community, we were forced to temporarily suspend our in-person meetings. Yet, within 2 weeks, beginning April 1st, our Rotary Club was back offering virtual programming featuring world-class scholars plus civic and community leaders as our speakers. As Rotarians, we have continued to connect Madison's largest group of business, professional, and nonprofit leaders and serve our community through our weekly meetings, virtual fellowships, and committee meetings. Just last month, our club awarded $320,000 in 4-year scholarships to graduating senior high school students, many of whom are first-generation Americans, people of color, and first-in-their-family college students. And our members serve as mentors for every student we support. In March, we awarded $150,000 in community grants to support 45 service organizations. For our youth, we convened our annual ethics symposium for over 200 Dane County High School juniors. They were changed by the experience. By now, you should have received your dues billing for the balance of 2020. Like many of you, the enterprises you lead, our club faces significant economic challenges. Were it not for lower meal expenses resulting from the shutdown, we would have incurred a substantial deficit for the fiscal year ending June 30th, because we've had fewer members and less revenue than we budgeted. The board is making a meal credit of $145 available to members who prepaid meals for the canceled luncheons from March 18th to June 30th. It would be greatly appreciated, however, if you would forego the credit and allow us to apply the credit to the club's projected deficit for the coming year. If you did prepay your meals, and if you require a refund, please contact the office for a revised billing. The board has made a number of decisions that will reduce expenses for the coming year, but especially with COVID-19, we expect membership to decline even further and are forecasting a significant deficit for the coming financial year. The board has created and asked me to chair an ad hoc committee charged with considering and recommending possible changes that might revise our meeting schedule in light of the pandemic, modify the dues structure of the club, and create new membership types in order to achieve our core value proposition to connect, grow, and serve. The committee will assess options for their impact on retaining current members, attracting new members, and achieving financial sustainability. For example, should the club continue to attempt to meet weekly in person or adopt a different meeting cadence? Should the club reduce or eliminate the subsidy of club expenses generated by meals that are prepaid but not eaten under the prepaid billing structure? Or should the club increase dues but only charge members for the meals that they eat? Should the club create new classes of membership to encourage spouses to join and encourage retirees to remain members or to rejoin? Should the club offer lower dues for certain individuals or under particular circumstances? Should the club consider a mid-year dues increase based on our July 2020 membership renewals and financial year 2021 projections? The committee will explore these and other options and review practices of other large Rotary clubs and clubs in our area and make our recommendations to the Board of Directors on September 8th. Please send any thoughts and suggestions you may have on these questions to me in care of the Rotary office. As we monitor reopening plans in our area, we expect to begin in-person meetings on July 8th, probably at the Alliance Center. Following pandemic guidelines will mean smaller gatherings at first. We're also exploring having smaller satellite meetings so that more of us continue to meet in person. For those unable to attend, we plan to continue to allow members to watch the proceedings online in real time or tape delay. You can watch for details in our newsletter. We are confident that you will want to continue to be a part of Rotary. We hope you take pride in the service and impact we are having. For those of you experiencing a career transition or personal situations and need an exemption for prepayment of meals for the next 6 months and wish to pay the dues only portion, please call the office. The Rotary Board will be reviewing such requests on a case-by-case basis. We hope most of you will pay the entire dues and prepayment for meals now. Regardless of how you choose to participate, we know you will continue to connect, grow, and serve to make our community better. If you have questions, please contact the Rotary office. Thank you. Best wishes. Stay strong and stay healthy.
Thank you, Mark. A great follow-up to Mark's report are a few videos that we've received from members who talk about why they're in Rotary and why they plan to remain with Rotary for some time to come. So let's watch a few of these videos.
Hey everyone, Sandy here. I just wanted to share with you a couple thoughts regarding Rotary and my Rotary membership, especially right now as we're going through a pandemic and seeing our youth out on the streets protesting for racial justice. And one of the reasons that I decided to join Rotary is because of the support of our youth, whether it's through our scholarship programs or even the mentoring program, which I've served as a mentor for. You know, I really saw the support for youth, and our youth need our support right now, and that's one of the reasons why I've decided to stick with Rotary. You know, the other reason is just because of the opportunities, the leadership opportunities that have come my way, whether it was serving on the board and now serving on the Madison Rotary Foundation, which I'm really excited for. You know, I just kind of go back to the reasons why I joined and what have been some of the ways that I've been involved. And I just continue going back to those things. And I hope that everyone else can kind of really think about, why you joined and what keeps you going, and really stick to those. And I hope very soon to see you all at our luncheons. I do miss you all. So take care, and we'll see you soon.
I joined Rotary 15 years ago to expand my connections and serve our community. And what a journey it's been, including serving as our club president last year. Through Rotary, I've met and developed friendships with a diverse array of business and community leaders, many of whom I would have never met. Rotary has really connected me to the greater Madison community in a way I never would have thought. Through our weekly meetings and personal relationships, I've learned so much more about Madison. I truly believe, as a club, we can come out of this stronger, better connected to even more leaders in our community, enhance our diversity, each continuing to grow personally, and expand the legacy of service our club has to the Madison community. However, just hoping that our club will evolve is not enough. Each one of us must reach out and notice the potential Rotarians that are around us every day and invite them to join us. I'm committed to Rotary and service to our community. Let's continue our club's great work together.
Hello, fellow Rotarians. This is Brian Chan. I hope you're all healthy and safe during this challenging time. I really miss you guys, and I know we'll all be together soon. I'm so proud to be a Rotarian. I'm proud of the work that we've done together in our community and throughout the world. Our community needs us more than ever. We provide hope, compassion, and leadership in our community. Rotary has made a profound impact on my life, and I hope it has for you too. So I hope you'll join me by becoming a Rotarian for life. Thank you.
When I considered whether to remain in Rotary, I recalled why I originally said yes to the invitation. I said yes in order to meet people I hadn't connected with. I said yes to the opportunity to learn and grow with some of the best and brightest leaders in our city. I said yes to make a unique impact within our club, our communities, and beyond, during the best of times and the most difficult ones we face today. Before, my yes was optional. I believe it is now required and must be intentional and active. We must all have a yes that draws us closer together, unites and strengthens us. A yes that fuels the Rotary way of serving others above self. It's the best time to seek peace and pursue it. The best time to be brave and build bridges while we connect, grow, and serve.
Hi everybody, I'm Steve Goldberg, but most of you already know that. I know that you have a burning question on your mind right now, and that is, when is Steve going to get a haircut? But you have a more serious question, and that is, why is Steve Goldberg staying in Rotary? Well, let me tell you. As a lifelong Madisonian, I know how much this community needs this club. I need this club. I thrive on the face-to-face contact and interaction that we usually have in this club. But unfortunately, we aren't able to experience that right now. And I miss all of you, even Jason Ilstrup. I even miss him. But in spite of the upside-down, chaotic time in which we live now, I'm enormously proud of how our club has adapted to the new normal. And I know that we'll get through this, and when we do, I promise you'll get a chance to see my new haircut. Meanwhile, I'd like you to understand one thing. Oh, I miss our luncheon meetings, the handshakes and the greetings. I must confess that I've been dreaming about the end of quarantining. I stay in Rotary, it's a good fit for me, and I think you will agree. We'll get through this, that's why we do this. I'm proud to be in Rotary, proud to be in Rotary. Thanks for holding your applause. Please remember, any royalties from this song go directly to the Rotary Club.
Well, thanks, Rotarians, for those messages, and Steve for the music, too. Now, we have birthdays to celebrate with a bit of humor or wisdom that complements Rotary's mission. We also encourage members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounded up to $100 for our club's Synergy Scholarship Fund. This week's birthday members are June 14th, Dave Scher. June 15th, Martha Casey. June 15th, Melissa Fellows. June 16th, Tom Fox. June 16th, Kathy Poi. June 17th, Linda Baldwin O'Hearn. June 17th, Dick Goldberg. And June 19th, Ralph Cagle. Thanks to our celebrants for their contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation. So please join me now in wishing them a happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rotarians. Happy birthday to you.
Yay. Thanks, Jeff. One last reminder that our Rotary District 6250 will hold a virtual district conference this Saturday, June 20th, from 7:30 a.m. until noon. There's no cost to log in and attend. You do have to register, though, so there will be information on our newsletter with more details on how to register. We'll now move to our program for today. I want to remind members that you can use the chat function in YouTube to ask a question of our speaker, and I'll be watching those questions as they come in during the presentation to use for our Q&A session after the presentation. Our speaker today is Michael Wagner. He's a professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at UW-Madison. There he directs the Center for Communication and Civic Renewal. Professor Wagner is the co-author of several books, and he has won multiple teaching and alumni outreach awards at the university. He's also the forum editor for the journal called Political Communication. Today, Professor Wagner will examine how Wisconsinites' media diets and the geographic context help explain the partisan polarization in our state. We look forward to your presentation, Professor Wagner, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thank you for speaking to us today. Thank you. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for that nice introduction and for the donation. That's a really lovely thing. I'm happy to have the chance to talk with you all today. My dad is a Rotarian in Minnesota, and I have a birthday to add. My oldest daughter turns 12 on Sunday, so happy birthday to her. I'm really happy to have the chance to talk with you about some work that we've been doing at the Center for Communication and Civic Renewal at UW-Madison. This is joint work with faculty members including Devon Shaw, Kathy Kramer, Lou Friedland, and Chris Wells, and students of ours, Jordan Foley, Josephine Lakito, Jiun Suk, Zongkai Sun, Yiming Wang, and a few others who are just beginning to help us out on the project as well. And so we're really happy to share some of the stuff that we've been thinking about. What I would like to do, I've been asked to talk for about 20 minutes and then take the questions you drop into the YouTube chat function, will be to talk a little bit about how pandemic voting is likely to occur and in the upcoming election, talk a little bit about how people's information diets, so what kind of media they use and who they talk to about politics and what kind of social media they use, help us understand different kinds of partisan and political divides in the country, and then kind of put all of that together to see what we can learn about how we think about civil society and the state of our democracy here in Wisconsin. So to get started, it's the case that over the last several presidential election cycles, things have just been steadily changing and reddening, if we use the red-blue divide, looking at the county election results over the course of several presidential elections in our state. And so we've seen different parts of the states start to kind of slowly become a little bit more likely to vote for Republicans, and then those that had been voting for Republicans got stronger, mostly, in their support for Republicans, whereas counties that were Democratic in 1996, some like Dane County, for example, have become more Democratic than they were a few decades ago. So there's been a shift in terms of which side is winning, and there's also been a shift in the partisan polarization that's occurring in a lot of our counties as well. And this is a really interesting puzzle for people to try to understand and be able to explain. Looking at 2016 in particular, this is a much more specific map, looking at much smaller units of analysis in our state. And we're finding that there are really localized political differences with some really stark changes. If you look over where Milwaukee is, you'll see this really dark blue surrounded then by really dark red. And so that's an interesting kind of thing. We see the same sorts of things happening near Eau Claire and in other kind of micropolitan areas around the state. All of this has been happening while there have been some really dramatic changes in how we get information as citizens. There's been a large decline in newspapers. Several newspapers have closed altogether. There are a handful of counties now in our state that have no newspapers at all, not even a weekly. We have less local news reporting on state issues. The number of reporters who are regularly at the State House reporting is far smaller than it was a few years ago, and is also smaller per capita given our size relative to other states in terms of the kind of State House reporting that gets done. We have, as I was saying, this growing bit of news deserts where there are places where there aren't really local newspapers to speak of. Of course, other things fill that gap, such as talk radio in suburban and rural areas, and also social media as another way to fill the gap of not having a newspaper. Local television news, of course, as we'll see later, is still a huge factor for how people get their information. There's also been just a huge rise in political advertising. It's not just on television anymore. It happens while your kids are playing video games. There are ads on video games. There are ads on the web. There are ads virtually in all manner of human life, and there are more and more political ads populating our spaces, especially as many of us now either have cut the cord with cable or at least fast forward past the commercials when we're watching things later. All of this has happened in an environment where it's easier and easier to get partisan news. And so not only are we losing some major news organizations that had traditionally brought people together around, say, the local newspaper, it's also the case that it's easier for us to find the source that tells us we're right and the other side is wrong. And not only are they wrong, they're evil, they're dangerous, they're a threat to our way of life. And you can imagine how difficult it becomes to compromise with people that you are told day in and day out are evil and dangerous and a threat to our way of life. And so our argument and some of the work we do at the center is that these news sources go a long way to helping us understand why the most politically engaged among us are often also the most divided among us. All of that happens in an environment where people still, on election day, show up to vote. And as it turns out, we've uncovered some kind of inequity in how just the simple act of engaging in the franchise, right, engaging in voting, occurs in Wisconsin. And so I'm not sure how well these will all show up on your screen, so I'll tell you the highlights here. The figure on the left is dealing with how long people reported waiting in line when they voted in the 2018 elections. This was the Governor Walker versus now Governor Evers major election. And so we did a survey of 2,000 Wisconsinites from across the entire state. The survey was done by the same firm that conducts the Marquette Law School poll, so that we could do our sampling in the way that they do, so we could compare our results to theirs. And we found that Hispanic voters in Wisconsin reported spending way more time in line than anyone else in Wisconsin. And we found that when we controlled for education and income, that actually didn't make things get better, it made things get worse. And so we found that Hispanics on average would spend about 8 minutes longer in line than other voters. And then when we control for other factors, that jumped up to about 30 minutes longer in line. The stuff on the right, the figure on the right, shows how long or how far, I should say, people say they live from their voting place. And the one dot that's away from the midline, in other words, the one group that's different than everybody else, are Black Wisconsinites. They reported having the longest commute to go and be able to cast their ballots in person. So we thought, if some voters are systematically more likely to stand in line, and other voters are systematically more likely to have to take longer to travel to get to the polls, perhaps these are the voters that are taking advantage of the policy remedies to engage in the vote, but not on election day. So we asked people, did they vote early? Did they vote by mail? Did they vote absentee? Did they vote absentee by mail or in person? And we found that the people who do that the most are the most highly educated and the wealthiest, and not the folks that are the most likely to stand in line longer or commute longer. And so the people taking advantage of the ways to vote more simply are not the ones who are already facing inequity when they try to show up at the ballot box. With all that said, we wanted to understand then, how do people take all of this information in, and how does the information that they take in help us understand what actually happens here in our state? And so this model is something that if your kids take a communication class in college around the country, they'll have to learn about the communication mediation model developed right here at UW-Madison. And this is our most recent extension of it, where people's individual characteristics and predispositions, just who they are already, the political environment they live in, and then the social structure that they live in. Or do they live in, say, a blue state or red state, a blue city or red city, a blue neighborhood or red neighborhood, a wealthy area, a less wealthy area, all those kinds of things are kind of what we start with. And then we have this choice between extremist left media, extremist right media, or more centrist media. And we have our choice of who we talk to about politics. Do we talk with people who are moderate? Do we talk with people who are more extreme or less extreme on the right or the left? And we think that those factors primarily then influence who engages in more liberal participation, conservative, and who has more liberal attitudes and conservative attitudes. And also, we think it also matters for how democratically legitimate people see various kinds of outcomes, such as, for example, when your side loses an election, does your side accept that loss, or does your side scream voter fraud or blame the news media or something else? So with that, we then wanted to really understand how people in Wisconsin get their information. And so the top row of data breaks this down by political partisanship, with the blue being Democrats, the kind of aqua being independents, and the red being Republicans. And we find that, for the most part, there's not a huge difference in watching the national nightly news. There's not a huge difference in national TV morning news. Local television is used the most by everybody. We see some differences, of course, with CNN and MSNBC, where Democrats are about twice as likely as Republicans to watch those. And we see another stark difference with Fox in the other direction, with Republicans more likely to watch Fox. And then the bottom row are the same data, but not organized by party, but by age. And so the further to the left are younger. So the first dot in each figure are 18 to 44-year-olds. The middle dot, the kind of red one, are 45 to 64. And the far right dot in each little figure are 65 and older. Here we see some really large differences. Older people, the people 65 and older, watch way more television nightly news, way more local television than younger people. Not a huge difference in terms of age and viewing of cable television, but an enormous difference in local television. And so the kind of news media that tend to bring people together around common local interests has a stark difference in age, but not so much in partisanship. When it comes to national public radio, national conservative talk radio, we see some differences that we might expect. The big differences here are really the local talk, where Republicans are more likely to listen to local talk radio and conservative talk radio than anybody else. And independents look a little bit more like Democrats on that score. Not a lot of age differences in these particular figures. Moving on to entertainment shows and satire shows, things like The Daily Show and things like that, we see Democrats like some of that a little bit more than Republicans do. But in terms of late night talk, so your kind of broad Tonight Show kinds of programming, there's not a real difference by age, but a slight advantage in terms of Democrats watching those. In terms of newspapers, once again, the age difference for national newspapers is not existent, but there's a large difference in local newspapers. 65 and older, and also those 45 to 64 are just way more likely than people 18 to 44 to read a local newspaper. But if you look on the top row, the partisan difference isn't that stark. Democrats are more likely than Republicans, but not by much. The big substantive difference is between younger people who vote and older people who vote. And so people are getting their information from different places. And the same is true in reverse for social media. Younger people are more likely to use Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Reddit, and Snapchat than those 45 and older. And so some big differences there, but again, not huge partisan differences. So some of the differences in media are partisan, with Fox and MSNBC, conservative talk radio. Others are more about age, local TV versus national TV, social media versus traditional media. We also then broke this down by region and saw some things that surprise the conventional wisdom about politics. A lot of what we hear are that rural areas are the places that engage in the most conservative talk radio and the most Fox News viewing because they're less likely to have a robust local newspaper. But what we found is that it's really Republicans and independents in small towns and rural areas, and Republicans in the suburbs, but not rural areas, who are the most likely to watch Fox. In fact, Republicans who live in urban centers are more likely to watch Fox in Wisconsin than are rural Republicans in Wisconsin. The same goes for talk radio, where urban center and suburban Republicans are more likely to listen, not by much, but a little bit more likely to listen to local talk than are Republicans in small town and rural areas. And of course, then you see kind of the other way in terms of CNN at the top, where Democrats in the small towns, Democrats in the urban centers, Democrats in the suburbs are more likely to watch CNN than their Republican counterparts. So that helps us understand, I think, why we see these differences of approval for President Trump based upon geography. So the metro core, really Madison, Milwaukee, you see on the top left, that's the lowest level, not surprisingly, of support for President Trump. Whereas the suburban ring, which is the top right figure, has the strongest support for President Trump, quite a bit stronger than rural, actually. And so, again, it's not rural Wisconsin where President Trump's major strength is. It is suburban Wisconsin, and especially the WOW counties, at least as last measured here about a year and a half ago. Small cities look a lot more like rural areas than they look like metro cities in Wisconsin as well. So with all of that, what does any of this have to do with how people vote? And so the two figures you see here are looking at what's the likelihood that a Wisconsinite split their ticket when they vote. So they voted for Tony Evers and Leah Vukmir in 2018, or Scott Walker and Tammy Baldwin in 2018. So one Republican and one Democrat in top of the ticket statewide races. In each figure, the further to the left that you go, the more heterogeneous one's information diet, which is to say, the more likely that people get their news from a wide array of sources, including sources that do not agree with them ideologically. So the Democrat who watches some Fox News or listens to some talk radio, the Republican who watches some MSNBC or reads a more liberal online political blog. And what we see is that on the figure on the left, which is the net news use, so these news sources, those who have a wide, diverse information diet had an almost 50% likelihood of splitting their ticket, whereas those who were liberals who just used liberal information or conservatives who just used conservative information had an almost 0% chance of splitting their ticket. The figure on the right, we asked people who they talked to about politics. And so in our survey, we asked people to tell us the initials of the 3 people they talked to the most about politics. And then we asked the participants in our survey to guess what political party those people they talked to the most were a member of. And so we have a measure of how often people, and then we asked how often do you talk with each of these people. And so we understand how diverse people's talk networks are and how often they engage in that talk. And so the further to the left in the figure on the right, the more diverse one's talk network, and the more to the right you go in that figure on the right, the more that Republicans are talking a lot to Republicans, the more Democrats are talking a lot to Democrats. And what we found is, once again, the people with the more diverse talk network were more likely to engage in split ticket voting. Not quite to the degree for information use, but still about quintuple the size of those who have a more cloistered, walled off set of people that they talk to. So there are things that can penetrate the party divide, and there are things from the news and from who we talk to that can reduce some polarized attitudes. But one thing we wondered about Wisconsin was how unique Wisconsin's polarization is as compared to other swing states. So in 2018, not only did we do a survey of Wisconsinites, we also interviewed people in 4 presidential swing states: North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio. And we asked them, how much do you trust the Trump administration, large corporations, local television, state journalists, so in other words, the reporters in your state, and labor unions. So, so large corporations tend to be thought of as a more conservative group. Labor unions tend to be thought of as more of a liberal group. Journalists and TV were kind of our media measures, and then the Trump administration as well. And we see that the top row in each state are the Republican answers, and the bottom row in each state are the Democratic answers. And you see that the dots go further apart in Wisconsin than they do in our other swing states. And so Wisconsin attitudes about Donald Trump, about labor unions, about local TV, about corporations are more divided between Republicans and Democrats than they are in these other tightly contested presidential swing states. The same is true in terms of how much people in Wisconsin trust different social groups as compared to people in these other swing states. And so we asked about their trust of urban residents, of immigrants, people of other religious faiths, people of other races, people in rural areas, and once again, big partisan differences in Wisconsin, especially amongst the Democrats in Wisconsin, as compared to folks in the other swing states. So then we started to wonder, well, if it's the case that these networks led to split ticket voting, do they also lead, these more diverse networks lead to split ticket voting? Are they also associated with attitudes that are less polarized about politicians and about different kinds of political groups? And what we found was that, yes, they are. When people talk more about politics with family and friends, which tends to be people more like them politically, they tend to have more polarized attitudes. And so what this figure is showing you is that whether we're asking about Scott Walker or Barack Obama, about the Tea Party or labor unions, the more people talk to family and friends, the more divided their attitudes are. Whereas the more they talk to coworkers, where they are less able to pick the ideology of their coworkers as they are their family and friends, those differences actually go in the other direction. They slightly, not a lot, but slightly attenuate partisan differences. All of this is impersonal public opinion data. And so I wanted to close by also talking about another aspect of our project where we've gone around the state, and some of us and some of our students, and we've interviewed about 600, I think, so far, Wisconsinites in all corners of our state. And we've asked them in these lengthy individual interviews and focus groups just to talk about where they get their information, how they talk about politics, that kind of thing. And these are the kinds of things that we're hearing back. We're hearing someone say, my brother's a liberal and he hates Governor Walker. He hasn't spoken to me in more than 6 or 7 times since the recall. Right, the recall was about 8 years ago now, and that interview was done about a year ago. Right, so maybe once a year, conversations are sometimes happening. And one of our students, Monica, was doing the interview there, and then another person said, yeah, on Facebook he actually unfriended me and blocked me because I'm the enemy. And we found this in our survey research as well. We asked people, have you stopped talking politics with somebody because of their views about the recall? And in 2018, this is 6 years after the recall, 50% of Wisconsinites said yes to that question. We asked if you've ended a friendship over that. 20% of Wisconsinites said they had ended a friendship over that same kind of thing. And we see that reflected in the next quote from a white woman in her late 50s who was a conservative activist around Milwaukee, in the suburbs of Milwaukee. And she says, I've got the cooties really bad. He doesn't even want to be in the same building with me. He will avoid seeing me. I haven't seen my brother socially in 8 years. And so these are the kinds of real consequences of the lived life our people in our state are living that I think kind of help us understand what all the little dots and numbers we've been looking at for the last 20 minutes have kind of been telling us. And so to kind of sum up with the 20 minutes here I'm at, certainly our state remains divided. Some of these are partisan, some of these are geographic, some of these divisions are related to where we get our information. They're fracturing our political life, they're fracturing our social life, but the more diverse one's own communication diet, the less polarized one's behavior tends to be. And on that note, I'll stop there and take some of the questions that might have been rolling into YouTube while I've been prattling on here.
Well, sure. Thank you, Professor Wagner. We do have a number of questions. Roberta Gassman asks, what is the impact of partisan redistricting on the polarization? Is that another factor that should be in that list?
That's a great question. So I would say probably the first or second place that most researchers have looked to try to explain some of the divides are redistricting, and especially partisan gerrymandering. And what we have found is that on the one hand, partisan gerrymandering has absolutely affected who ends up being a representative. So in Wisconsin, in our last election, I think around 64% or so of ballots cast were for Democrats, and Democrats won about 46% of legislative seats. And so there's kind of an imbalance there. And in survey research we've done, Wisconsinites across parties, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans say they agree with the idea that the party that gets the most votes should have the most seats. And so people tend to figure that redistricting is a problem. But in terms of causing polarization, the research has shown that it just doesn't. And one reason that we know that's the case is that the United States Senate is just as polarized as the United States House, and the Senate is not districted at all. It's just the state. And so it's not just the case that redistricting has divided us. It affects who can be elected in particular districts, but it tends not to be the case that more extreme lawmakers always come from safer districts. Some do, but some don't. It varies quite a bit. And so while I've not met a political scientist who argues that gerrymandering is great for democracy, the research on balance tends to say it's not gerrymandering that's the cause of our polarization. It's the cause of who we end up having represent us, but those are related but slightly different things.
Good. Okay. Sharon Alden asked, what population or demographic groups in Wisconsin are more likely to either embrace or resist voting by mail?
So embracing voting by mail, wealthier people, people with more education, and there's a slight effect for people who are white as well. So those tend to be the ones that in the past have embraced voting by mail. Now the parties are making a pretty concerted effort to try to get their voters to bank those votes early and request absentee ballots to try to vote early. And so whether that effect remains the same for 2020, I think is an open question, because the parties are making a much more concerted effort than they have in years past to do so. But so far, the evidence has been wealthier, educated folks for the most part, and also a slight effect for whites.
Okay, Larry Hands asked, he wondered about the decline in civics education and its effect on young people, and wondered how to turn protesters into political participants.
Yeah, those are two really good questions. The Tommy Thompson Center for Public Leadership on campus, I'm a faculty affiliate there, but the director is a guy named Ryan Owens, who's a political scientist who used to work for Governor Thompson. He is really interested in that question of civics as well, and he commissioned a survey of UW-Madison students, and maybe throughout the whole system, I can't remember, but on the Tommy Thompson Center's website, I know they have information about that civics survey, and found that at least in Wisconsin, students at our universities tend to have had a pretty decent civics education, but there is that worry more broadly, and there's been a movement afoot across the country to kind of redouble our efforts on civic education. And then the question about, the second question was about people who are active online,
Or
turning
how
that
to
into more
convert-
engagement.
It was more how to convert protesters.
Oh, protests,
into,
sorry, yeah.
Civic participants.
Yeah, that's a great question too, because a lot of people who protest have found the political participation of voting to not have delivered what they prefer. And so it's interesting that on the one hand, they're engaging in a much more costly kind of participation. It's way easier to vote than it is to show up at a bunch of protests, and it's way less risky to vote than it is to show up at a bunch of protests. And so these folks are clearly civically engaged. The question is, what sorts of avenues are they willing to participate in that are avenues that are a part of traditional political and civic life. So civic participation might be volunteering at a school or a church or a neighborhood organization, political participation, voting, registering people to vote, joining organizations like the League of Women Voters, for example. And so converting the protest participant into a person who participates in system participation is not as easy as it sounds. And so I think one thing that has been shown to help is that when folks see that their participation in politics or civics has some kind of efficacious effect, so in other words, that their participation meant something to what happened, that tends to be something that helps people be more likely to want to participate. I always tell my students that democracy is for losers, and what I mean by that is that if you lose in an election, if your side loses, there's always another one. Democracy is for you. There's always another chance to engage. There's always another chance. There's always a different level of government to take your grievance. There's always a different branch of government to take your grievance. There's always another election. And so if you're not getting what you want, there are multiple avenues to get in. And to persuade people to keep trying and trying again when their first experience is a negative one is a challenge, it turns out.
Very good. Rick Kiley asks, how do we separate the correlations from what's actually causal?
Great question. So one thing that we've tried to do is to do panel surveys where we interview the same people both before and after the election, and that way we can know what their kind of partisan strength was, their political knowledge was, a bunch of other things about them in October, and see whether those are the things that are predicting their attitudes in January, or whether other things that happened in between were predicting their attitudes. And so some of the research I was showing you comes from panel surveys, some from cross-sectional ones where we only have correlations and can't make a causal argument. And so it varies. But what we try to do is our panel studies and experiments where we vary different factors of something we want to test to different populations and see if just changing that one thing leads to different kinds of outcomes. So those are two ways to get at causal information. Of course, experiments are less realistic, which means they often might not be as substantively meaningful as a causal argument. So it's really tough to unpack, which I guess is good. It's job security, I suppose, but it's also frustrating because we really would like to know what causes what.
And I imagine it's a particular challenge in a year when so many things are new,
right,
and so many factors are changing. Bob Sorge asks, which news sources do you find to be the least partisan, and where do you get your own news?
Those are good questions. I would say that Wisconsin Public Radio in our state, PBS Wisconsin in our state, do a really good job of providing a wide array of sources to their stories. In some content analyses we've done around the state, most newspapers have a fairly balanced set of folks that they quote, but they tend to be biased in favor of the more extreme members of political parties, which tends to have an effect of leading us to believe that our lawmakers might be even more extreme than they really are. If the ones who are getting the most attention are more extreme than the average lawmaker, that paints a slightly biased picture of what our lawmakers look like. I tend to get my information from a lot of different sources, and so in Madison, I read the Cap Times and the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison 365. I kind of vary which local TV show I watch each week to watch. A lot of my former students doing the news on TV. And then nationally, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Vox, 538. Those are places I tend to go to the most for information. But there are lots of others that I try to check in with just because it's something that I study. And so I spend a fair amount of time on Fox and Breitbart and MSNBC and CNN and different liberal and political conservative blogs. I wouldn't say that centrist media is always best, right? Sometimes a conservative source or a liberal source will highlight an issue that the mainstream media are ignoring, and it's good that they're trying to raise attention to an issue. The question is just, are they doing so in a fair way? Are they doing so in a way that's verifiably true?
Okay, our last question is from Rich Leffler, and he asks, why would the formerly Democratic Western rural areas in Wisconsin now be voting Republican. What happened there to make that shift?
So one of the faculty affiliates of our center, Kathy Kramer, wrote a really terrific book that takes on a lot of this question called The Politics of Resentment. And part of what she found, so she would go around to different small communities in the state and ask, hey, where do people get together and talk about politics? And then she would go to those places and say, hi, I'm Kathy Kramer from UW-Madison. I want to invite myself into your conversation if you'll let me so that I can hear what your concerns are. And she would talk to these folks. She would go back time and time again to the same places. And what she found was that a lot of folks in rural Wisconsin, and also a lot of suburbanites who felt a kinship with rural Wisconsin, felt that their needs and desires were being ignored by the state, being mocked in some ways by political leaders in larger cities, by the news media, and the like, and began to feel deep resentment toward kind of the rurally conscious way that those folks want to live their lives. And so they felt that they were being ignored by some groups in power. And then at that same time, Governor Walker, at the time Kathy was doing her work, was running a campaign making a similar argument that Madison and Milwaukee are the problem. They're ignoring your way of life. They're not giving you the resources you need. And it kind of was a message that fit really well with enough of those voters to change that first figure we looked at in 1996 to the figure we saw in 2016. So I think that's probably the most comprehensive work on that would be Kathy's book, The Politics of Resentment. So thanks. You bet.
Thank you, Professor Wagner, for that presentation, and thanks to everybody who tuned in today. Stay healthy, Rotarians, and we are adjourned.